As long as you allow someone to hide behind layers of paperwork, they're safe. If nobody ever says your name, you don't worry if they keep saying, oh, that ugly guy down there, down the block. But if nobody ever says your name, nobody ever is able to associate you outside of a very small group. Now when you name names, everybody, the cover is taken off. Everybody gets to see who these people are. And I think it's great. I've always advocated that you should call people out and say who they are. Because once you take away a bully's power, then you take back the power to yourself.
The biggest offenders have been, if you have an opportunity to take a look at the banks, and you will see the largest number of property owners that banks are Deutsche Bank, US Bank, and they have had the largest number of foreclosures.
So let's say Home Loan Corporation made $1 billion worth of loans in a quarter. They took them all and bundled them up, and they sold them. They turned them into a security,
right?
And it's a security trust. And then they sold them to investors, but it's a trust. So the banks, Deutsche Bank, US Bank, Wells Fargo, Chase, other are the trustees of these trusts.
Right.
So they stand in the place of the owner.
And one thing that you need to know about some of these banks on here that bought these mortgages that were bundled up as securities were also the same banks that set up the mortgage companies that did the loans. You need to know that.
Yes.
Or they did the loans themselves under the guise of something else. But they funded these, I think Katie mentioned one, the Lending Association of California or something like that. Oftentimes these very same mortgage lenders that were doing subprime lending were subprime lenders of some of the major banks in this country.
In most of our cases, nobody even knows where the note is anymore. They can't even find it. It got sold all over the place. They can't tell you where the note is. They can't really prove who the owner of the loan is anymore. It's really rather remarkable how the system ended up working to the point where it's the most valuable asset that most people will ever own.
Right.
Nobody, and you went and you signed that note, and that note was, you choked when you signed it because it was such a big amount. It's lost.
We recently changed legislation to deal with the situation where the banks, originally when I was working with them, wanted to obtain and take no responsibility for the property while it's in transition to the point where it is foreclosed upon. And it was very ironic when I would sit in a meeting with them and I would say, well, don't you think you have some responsibility of cutting the grass, shoveling the snow, instead of the city of Milwaukee taxpayers? Well, we really don't own the property altogether. It's not in our process. So I said, okay, so if there's a fire there, you don't want me to have somebody go take care of it. Well, I don't mean that. So they eventually did come to the table and agree to the legislation which we changed would put more onus responsibility on the interim basis for them to take care of these properties.
People would say that the speculators are what got us into this foreclosure issue in the first place. What speculators did is they would buy properties at very low prices and basically speculate that the value would go up. And so they would sell these properties for much higher than they paid for them. You have two culprits in this situation. You've got the speculator who is buying low and of course wants to make a significant profit, but then you have the banks who gave loans to the people that the speculators sold to. And now it's interesting how like sort of works, because a lot of these speculators have lost everything. So they've suffered the consequences, right? But the banks, what did they get? A get out of jail free card. They've got the government giving them money. They've got us taking care of these properties that they should be taking care of. So it's interesting, the justice has sort of found its way to the speculators, but the banks seem to be off the hook.
You may have noticed that there were some people that we didn't hear from tonight. And those are the three banks that have the largest number of foreclosed homes in this area: US Bank, Wells Fargo, and Deutsche Bank. All were sent letters 2 weeks ago on November 5th, inviting them to join us here this evening. We have to date had no response from either U.S. Bank, which is headquartered in the Twin Cities, or Wells Fargo, with headquarters in San Francisco. We did, in fact, hear a few days ago from Deutsche Bank, interestingly, the one farthest away, with headquarters in Frankfurt, offering to enter into constructive dialogue. And we intend to take them up on this offer, to meet with them and to see what those words mean.